today is known as AVI Fresh. AVI Foodsystems is about $1 billion company. When I got there, they were about a $500 million company and operated in 9 states. Today that's 44 states and Canada, and the little division I started called AVI Fresh is now responsible for about $280 million in sales in less than a decade. So the owners of this private company were willing to take a chance as long as there's an ROI, and that's a lot of the piece that we're talking about here, because at the end of the day there has to be business, there has to be profitability, there has to be an ROI. But today we're going to talk more about personal ROI. And thank you to Adobe and the creators of Photoshop for that lovely photograph. So my focus is really to think about your impact, your role, and what you can do to make a difference. You know, a lot of people, and you said failure to act, right, Dr. Fogel? But a lot of people are sitting around waiting for somebody else to take charge, somebody else to make a difference. You know, and I really want to rethink the way we approach that. And part of that is by setting a personal mission statement. What can each of you do? You obviously have an interest or in sustainability, or you wouldn't be here today, or you were required by your class to be here and you didn't have a choice. So I'm not sure which one it is. You decide that. I look at it as a 4-pronged approach. First being the environmental impact, and certainly that has to do with the farming, with agriculture, with things that the United States has gotten away from in the past few decades. You're going to hear from some local farm teams here in New York a little bit later. We sponsored a dinner last night that featured a lot of different things, but not just produce, but meats and eggs and grains. And that's where we've really strayed as a country, and this is nothing against Walmart or any of the major retailers, but we've conditioned ourselves to become, let's find the cheapest bargain available, and who cares where it came from or whatever, because it's all about where else I can spend my money on material things. So thank you to the Kardashians.
Wow.
But in every environmental decision, you've got an economic decision. You've got a social impact that you need to think about. And it all boils down to personal. Who you are, who you want to be, what you want to be known for, and what kind of difference or footprint that you're going to leave in society in the future. The impact. So when I look at environmental, and it's not just you, Dr. Fogel, with this clicker, I guarantee you. Okay? So when we look at environmental, every person can make a tremendous impact. You know, and I have a quote on each one of the pages because I really want to stimulate some thought here. I'm not going to give you answers today. All I'm doing is stimulating things for you to have further discussion about, to look inside yourselves, to talk to each other, and think about how you can make an impact. Because we don't inherit the earth from our ancestors, we borrow it from our children. And that's very apparent as we move ahead. I spend a lot of time speaking in K through 12 because I'm trying to impact a generational shift, not just in sustainability, but in health and wellness, as we have become the most obese society in the history of the world. So there's a lot of underlying things that tie back into sustainability and our need for speed, if you will, our look for convenience that have severely and long-term negative impacts on who we are as the United States. So I want you to think about transportation, utilities, waste, and some may challenge, you know, we heard about electric car earlier, I think from the provost. But is the electric car the way to go? Because where does the electricity come from to plug that car in? In most cases, it's still fossil fuels that are generating the electricity. So there's a lot that needs to be debated. The Prius is not necessarily the answer, but nor is a thirsty, you know, twin turbo V8. Though they sound great, right? Yeah. So I want you to think about everything that you touch on a daily basis, everything that you use, everything that you throw away. It's easy to make decisions, but it's also easy to become hypocritical through the lack of information or misinformation in today's society. So the challenge that I would give each of you personally in an environmental aspect is to think of how much CO2 emissions that you are personally creating as an individual and contributing to society. Read the labels on the things that you use, the things that you consume. Think about your toiletries, the cleansers. People say, oh, it's biodegradable. Well, everything's biodegradable. It just is a matter of time. A plastic bag, it might be 93 years. It's eventually going to break back down. But think about the foods, your durable goods, and the clothing that you select. When we think about economic impact, I like to look at local business, and that's what I created the AVI Fresh model for, because most food service companies are procurement companies first, looking at national and international global purchasing contracts before they look at the customers and the clients that they serve. So what I would like to propose is that, based on some information, if you spend $100 at a local business, a local farm, a local artisan, roughly 68% stays in your local economy. It's very different when you spend at a large corporate conglomerate because they have a lot of layers where that money goes to, where that product came from, the packaging. And so many companies today sound sustainable, they feel sustainable, but that is generally a very glossy marketing image that has been created by a team to present that idea, but it doesn't follow through if you do your actual research on that corporation. We're the largest importer, or second largest importer of goods in the world, over $230 billion of goods and services each month. So think about the staggering impact as I propose we move in the societal shift back to generating our own goods and products. I live outside of Cleveland, Ohio, where we have tens of thousands of vacant factories and buildings that have been shuttered for decades as the steel industry collapsed and moved overseas and jobs moved out of our region and the Great Lakes. And I look at all of that and I see potential. But what I don't see is businesses clamoring to create because of the environment and because it's cheaper to do business overseas. It's easier, they've built the infrastructure. So I say you have the opportunity as students today to make a difference. So think about businesses that support your ideals personally. Think about that mission and find out where the foods you eat and goods that you consume are coming from. Because every time you spend money, you're casting a vote for the future world that you want. From a social perspective, I look at the political and social landscape, and we talked about that some today. This will be a very hot charged year coming up with a new presidential election coming up. Donald Trump is certainly stirring it up, and we won't get into politics today. But it's a live apprentice show every day on CNN and USA Today, is it not? I mean, that's the whole thing, shock and sensationalism. But your government, this campus, your local leaders here in the Alfred and New York State, they make decisions every day that affect each of your lives. So your challenge is to research each of those and how you have a voice. And are they listening to your voice? Are you afraid to speak up? Are you taking action? And make a concerted effort to understand their points of view, because it's not about argument. It's not about who's right. It's about a healthy discussion to create an end result where everybody benefits. But make sure your stance, your opinions are heard and you're making a contribution. That's my proposition. Ethics is knowing the difference between what you have a right to do and what is really right to do. When I look at this on a personal level, your lifestyle positively or negatively impacts your community in everything that you do every day. And I thought about this recently. I had a small farm in the city for the first 7 or 8 years, and John Dietrich, your director here, remembers I started a management training program when I first started this division, and all of the training and dinners actually took place at my house. And since now the company's massive, and none of that takes place in a big training center at a college campus, very similar to yours, for our managers around the country that we fly in for a couple of days. But I travel and do 3, 5, 6 cities a week, as we were discussing at dinner last night. So it made it very difficult for me to maintain the farm. So I sold it and bought a condo on a lake, and I thought, that's easier, I don't need the maintenance. But I've been there now about 2 years, and I come home from business travels, and I think, oh, what a beautiful view. But I've got no land left, I've got no connection to my environment, and I don't feel at home, and I never have. And I realized when I had 111 boxes still upstairs in the loft that hadn't been unpacked in 2.5 years, I've got a situation that I need to change because my life doesn't feel fulfilling. And so last week I put that house on the market. So I think decide the things that are important to you. Surround yourself with positivity. Give back to your communities. Get involved. So your challenge will be to think about these ethical decisions that you make every day. How do they impact you? How do they impact your family, your friends, your classmates, your professors? And how do you give back, even if it's in small ways? Buying from local farms, buying from local artisans, working with your ceramics program here, which is one of the best in the United States, to create place setting for 8 to take with you when you have your first home. Think about those impacts that you can make, because life is the sum of all of your choices. So set your personal mission statement. Take the time today to determine your path. I'd like you to think about outlining the principles that are key to you. What makes a difference? What do you want to accomplish in life? We don't know. I didn't know I was going to end up in food service running a billion-dollar conglomerate across the country when I was in college. It was a surprise. It was a surprise to my parents. They told me I was wild and crazy and I'd never live past 30. I proved him wrong. So for my 30th birthday, I threw a huge party and flew my parents in from Nashville and, publicly announced I had made it. Didn't know if I'd live through that night. But those are the key things. Outline your principles and the things you want to accomplish and set some timelines to make those happen, to make a difference. Because talk without action is nothing. In closing, I think this is a really critical statement. Jane Goodall, many may know her from Gorillas in the Mist and all of the excitement a long time ago, but I think this really sums up my thoughts and the way I look at things, and I hope you can share this. You cannot get through a single day without having an impact on the world around you. What you do makes a difference, and you have to decide what kind of difference you want to make. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Yeah, you keep talking about local farms, and then you get a lot of the food from local farms. Where are these local farms? Like, how local are they?
Are you talking about specifically to your university?
Yeah.
Or just in general for my company?
Both.
Sure. For the university, John Dietrich and your executive chef, Gretchen Mayer, can provide you an entire list of that. A lot of your chicken, a lot of your products, about 15% of your produce in season all comes from within about 20 or 30 miles of your university. He can provide that. There's an unfortunate situation, as you can imagine, in the university market in the upper northeast and the upper Midwest, and that's the fact that the growing season doesn't coincide whatsoever with the academic year. So we piloted some programs like at Kenyon College, if you're familiar with that school. That is the #1 sustainable small college in the United States and a model for many other campuses. Over 42% of all of their food is purchased within 50 miles. Their definition of sustainability is a 50-mile radius, or in Knox County. So that impacts everything. We have our grains milled there. We have a farm. We raise cattle. We raise lamb. We raise hogs. But it's in a very particular environment that works for that. Now, it's not the same for my schools in Manhattan, of course. But we do have rooftop gardens at Hunter College. We do have cooperations at Wellesley College and in Boston with local farms and restaurateurs. But the focus is to put that money back into the local economy to create jobs, but create sustainable systems. At Kenyon, for example, there was a 120-year-old third generation or fourth generation family slaughterhouse that was going out of business. And I apologize in advance to any vegans or vegetarians in the audience as I talk about this, but there is a need for animal protein still. And we created a program with the Future Farmers of America and the 4-H and the local Amish community there to slaughter, cure, and cut down all of our hogs land. And so a family business that was going to be out of business after 100 years is now employing 18 people in that market. So these are little things, but all the little things add up to make a big difference. Yes, ma'am?
Do you do any work with donating extra food to shelters, or because on such a large scale there must be a large amount of waste?
There is. And you can, again, get your local stuff from John Dietrich, your director. We do a lot of work with that. There are some very specific legal liabilities that are involved. You can imagine in a litigious society, people that are involved in a shelter or whatever still have the ability to file suit if they get sick because the food was mishandled. So we do. There has to be indemnity clauses signed. I know this sounds crazy, but just because of the way society is today, I mean, you saw, I think, on the news recently where an aunt sued her nephew for jumping on her too hard and breaking her wrist. You know, that type of ludicrous litigation is, what's happening in our society today. So unfortunately, it should be more giving back, but we do have a program here in the Alfred community and at all of our schools that returns to food shelters and food banks around the country. Yes. Yes, sir.
Your initiatives are building infrastructure for the future, and I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about why you identify sustainability as a cultural shift, so a shift in our society, rather than a cultural fad or a temporal interest.
Sure. Well, I think that's great. That's a really good question. I think one of the big topics or big discussion points of this entire conference. A lot of people in the beginning, including my boss, the CEO of the company, thought I was a little bit crazy coming in from the East Coast to say I was going to create a holistic approach to food service that looked at utility usage, that looked at food supply chain, that looked at where it came from, the quality of the products. And that was part of my contract. He had never worked with somebody like me before. I had a 7-page employment agreement that my attorneys drew up because I was leaving a major corporation with thousands and thousands of shares of stock options that I was giving up to go for an unknown entity. And a lot of people, including my father, said, "You're crazy." And that's why I bring up the topic of ROI, because I started sustainability in the food service market long before it was sexy to do so. But I had to prove that there was a return on investment for our corporation, because without that, nothing exists. So as far as a fad versus societal shift. I think with social media today, I think with Food Network and HGTV, the exposure people have and the connection to their foods, the connection to their clothes, the connection to your cars, they all make lifestyle statements. And I don't believe that's a fad at all. We've seen a solid decade of growth in this market of sustainability. We've seen schools like Alfred University, Wake Forest. I work with at Baruch College in downtown Manhattan. I adjunct at their master's program in sustainability there in New York City. So when you see universities developing degree programs focused on societal change, which is what sustainability really is all about. Societal change as it impacts each other, as it impacts business and corporate America, and our global economy. I determine that to no longer be a fad.
We have time for one more question. We have topic.
Oh, wow, yeah. Are those expensive seats, or how's the air? Yeah.
What has AVI done to encourage students to personally take on the responsibility of sustainability in terms of food waste and recycling?
Sure, I think that's a great question. I know that if you look back, research our company a little bit, you'll find out we were one of the first to provide trayless service in the United States. In fact, Alfred University was one of the first and featured in the New York Times for that article. So things like that, as well as weighing post-consumer waste. And when I say post-consumer, that's what you leave on your trays or your plates after you've had your meal. That is weighed and demonstrated to you. I know John has run that. John Dietrich, your director, has run that kind of program here as we do at 50, 60 other universities around the country. But the big piece is I'm adamant about cooking from scratch and not using processed foods. When you cook from scratch, you have a lot of natural scrap material left over. So some of that goes into stock production and soups. But our pre-consumer waste, John is putting back into the Alfred area farms and everything for pig slop and things like that to reduce all of that waste and divert it out of landfill. We were also one of the first to install equipment called composters and digesters that take the organic waste and create a slurry. And then at some of my schools, I have an advanced system that's a dehydrator. And what that does is things that can't go back to a farm or don't have useful nutritional value for livestock is dehydrated. 90% of the moisture content is taken out. So what are we doing in effect? We're reducing waste that is transferred to those landfills by up to 90%. Those are big impacts. But this is not, and this is again, these are all great questions, but I want you to think about what can each of you do to make a change, make a difference, make an impact, and work with each other to create something new in society, not wait for somebody else or point fingers or place blame, but how can you make a difference?
Thank you very much.